everybody. I'm Pastor AJ Houseman, and welcome to 10-Foot Pole, a podcast to dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. Well, welcome to Season 2, Episode 8. I actually originally thought this was Episode 9 because I took a week off but didn't adjust my spreadsheet. And then I was like, wait a minute, these numbers aren't adding up. No one needed to know that information, but I'm sharing it anyways. Our guest for today is Pastor Tamika Jancewicz from First Lutheran Church in Ellicott City, Maryland.
Yeah, over here in Maryland. The weather's kind of dope right now, so yeah.
What's it like?
It's apparently supposed to be like 60 something degrees.
Wow.
Happy winter.
Right.
Yeah, it's dreary, but I kind of like this kind of weather. So
I think that's same actually. So when I was in London this summer, it was just like 65 and overcast the whole time. And people that we were there with were just like bitching and complaining about, oh, every time I come here, the weather's terrible, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, this is amazing. Actually,
it is.
If I could walk down the street in jeans and a flannel in July, this is where I want to live. Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying. So
exactly.
Not complaining. Yeah.
And then I moved to the South and you're like, ugh.
I don't know. I kind of like the South too, but we'll
I just mean weather-wise.
It's fair enough.
Yeah. Anyways, well, thanks for joining us this week. I want to make an announcement at the beginning because I usually make announcements at the end, and then I think people shut it off and maybe they don't hear them. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to let everybody know kind of what's going on with the website, that there is a swag available. So you can get, cool shirts. There's just some like t-shirts and stuff that have podcast logos on them. These are just for fun, mostly for you to kind of help promote the podcast, and in a very, very small way, it does financially support the podcast. So please go check those out. And if there's something you were hoping to find there and didn't, let me know, because we could make more things possibility. It is indeed random, eclectic assortments of items there. So check those out, and coming really soon will be our resource page. So look for that in the near future. All right. So today, Pastor Tamika and I are going to talk about the gospel lesson, Matthew 4, chapters 12 to 23. If you're planning on going to church in a church that follows the Revised Common Lectionary, you're going to hear this on Sunday, January 22nd. And I believe if you plan on attending First Lutheran Church in Ellicott City, Maryland, you're going to hear Pastor Tamika talk about this gospel message from the pulpit.
That's correct. Mm-hmm. So this is very helpful. Thank you.
Well, you see, I like to plan it that way.
Yeah.
Because I have gotten questions like, AJ, you're kind of like critical of the Revised Common Lectionary. Why do you keep following it? And it's for two very basic reasons. One, because it just kind of helps me kind of streamline what to do, right? Like I'm not picking and choosing parts of the Bible out of thin air. And two, it usually does help most of my guests, which makes them, I think, more willing to talk and have a conversation, because it is also useful in their professional lives, and not just because I randomly emailed or texted them and was like, hey, do you want to do this thing?
Yeah, it's very helpful. So
yeah.
Thanks. Yep. Preparing ahead of time.
So I'm going to read from the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition, which is the new one that they updated it in 2021. It's got some good updates to it. There's not a whole lot that's different. There's just some like subtle things, like there's a lot of places where they have removed like the specifically male genderized language for God, which I greatly appreciate. As we've talked about on the podcast before, that like God doesn't have God is either no gender or all genders. We don't really know, but definitely not specifically male. So there's that. There's some other updated language. Anyway, so I've been kind of transitioning to try to use that mostly. Sundays and Seasons still just has the New Revised Standard Version, and I expect, like anything else in church movement, it could take 10 to 15 years for that to adjust. So we'll use it anyways. And I'm also going to read through verse 25, which is just to the end of the chapter. Those last two verses just get left off a little bit, but I'm going to include them because I think that they're important in the topic. So here we go. Now when Jesus heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew to Galilee. He left Nazareth and made his home in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. Land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, on the road by the sea, across the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light, and for those who sat in the region and the shadow of death, light has dawned. From that time, Jesus began to proclaim, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near." As he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of people." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went from there, he saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and his brother John, in the boat with their father Zebedee, mending their nets, and he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Jesus went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and every sickness among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought to him all the sick, those who were afflicted with various diseases and pains, people possessed by demons or having epilepsy or afflicted with paralysis, and he cured them. And a great crowd followed him from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. Well, so we're back in Matthew. We veered away for a couple of weeks since Christmas. So what's happened so far? We talked about the genealogy with Pastor Sarah, so that's the very beginning of Matthew. Then after that, after we have Jesus's birth as a footnote, we hear the Magi come to visit. They stop to see Herod. Herod asked the Magi to find this new king of the Jews, right, and to turn him over to Herod. And they don't do that. Instead, they warn the family that this is about to happen. And so this new family and baby Jesus head to Egypt, where they live as refugees for a time. Then they come back and settle in Nazareth. And then Jesus goes and gets baptized by Johnny B. Mm-hmm. And then he is tempted in the wilderness. And now we're here. This is what happens right after that. Just to catch up so we know where we're at.
Sure.
So what do you think? This is kind of it's like two parts of a story rolled into one here. Like, I think you have this sort of beginning part where we're talking about Jesus starting his ministry, right?
Right.
And then and where he decides to start ministry, and then we have this part where he calls his first disciples.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting. My favorite gospel is Luke and Mark. They're kind of on the same level, and Matthew has always been kind of a little harder for me.
Okay.
But I'm starting to really appreciate this gospel this time around because of the placement of Jesus, because the way the author takes us from place to place, mm-hmm. right? So each place kind of has a purpose in his ministry. And so for him to go from as a newborn child to like his parents or his parents' hometown, mm-hmm. and then have to leave there because it wasn't safe to go to the place where his ancestors were enslaved. Yeah. And then to leave there to go to back home, where his family is his family traveled from, and then go to another place where he's finding probably more people like him, or not necessarily in the higher status of people. So he's like, it takes you through this journey of where Jesus is going and coming from. And it connects him so closely with his ancestors. And I think that is pretty big.
Well, you said something in that really kind of sparked my attention of thinking about, the family fleeing to Egypt, and this being the place where his ancestors were enslaved.
Yeah.
And now it's a place they're finding safety.
Right.
So that's a very stark contrast there, to think about.
Yeah. Well, so I think it's just where I'm at right now in my own personal life journey. There's something to say about going to the places where your ancestors have been and lived, and experiencing those places for yourself. And that being a huge part of your growth, of who you are, of becoming who you are. And so I really appreciate Matthew's attention to that, to like take us through Jesus's becoming, you know? Mm-hmm.
And also like all the way, through the genealogy and the importance of including that, especially in the way, that the author of Matthew does include it.
Right.
It's building this person, right? It's building this character.
Right.
And maybe not one that like we always really see on the surface.
Right.
So let's talk about sort of this historical Jesus figure, this man of who he would have been coming.
Yeah.
Born to a Jewish family in a Roman occupied area, and we already know that that's been a problem since he was born, right? And so he's been displaced into Egypt, and then still continuing to be displaced throughout his life,
right?
As he moves through the areas, and where he ends up, right? So like where he starts his ministry, in and of itself is kind of on the margins. It's in these rural fishing towns. It's not in the center of major metropolitan areas. Like that's not who he's not trying to connect with rich and powerful people. That says a lot about his character right there, because he never really does.
No, but I don't think that would have been even authentic to who he was. Like, if you think back on why Matthew places him in all these spaces, right? Like, he wasn't born of like higher status.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't have made sense for him to go to those places. No, he went to the people that he belonged to. And yes, they were of lower status. They were in the margins. And, but I think what makes him appealing is because he knows them, and he knows the story of what it means to be in the margins. He's not going to the margins as a person who is of higher status and going to the lowly people to teach them something. Yeah. He's going to his people with an understanding of who they are, because it's also a part of who he is, right?
Yeah, and so that also, I think, gives a particular lens if we think about sort of missionary work that, like, I think has really been twisted in how the church has done missionary work throughout its history, Christian history at least, where, typically historically what's happened is sort of we go into a place and we have all the things that we bring to them and blah blah and fix them and make them Christian and save them,
right?
And you don't see that model in Jesus. He's not doing that. He's going to places where you said it, that he knows them, those are his people, right, where he listens to them and talks with them. And is, the work that he does is through the relationships that have been built there.
Right. And he honors who they are. Mm-hmm. Like, he speaks their language. So he doesn't say, come with me and we'll go hang out at the temple. He says, come with me and I will make you fisher of people. He meets them exactly where they are. And I think that might have been the driving force of them leaving and going with him immediately, is that he spoke to them in a language they could understand.
Yeah, you're naming something right there of this sort of interesting, why did they just get up and leave with him? Is that like what how weird is that?
Super weird.
Yeah, like
Very weird.
I think
Yeah.
about it in a couple of ways. Like one, we'll talk about like the who he chose to call, right? Like
Right.
the fact that he's just walking along in Galilee and he sees these two guys fishing and he's like, "Hey, you want to be my disciples?"
You want
And
to
they're
come hang
like,
out?
"Yeah, okay."
Yeah.
And then
Right.
they do. And then the
Right.
next two people he randomly finds, "Hey, you want to be my disciples?" And immediately, we have that language immediately, which is very much more of a Mark kind of language. So for
Yeah.
Matthew to throw that in there weighs some importance that they immediately got up and followed him.
Yeah.
And I just like it makes me question, like, are these so these guys that become very important in this Christian movement and like the forefathers of like a whole new church, they're not like specifically chosen. They're just,
Yeah.
at least that's not how it reads, right? Like these are just the first random people that he found.
Yeah.
And he takes them and anoints them and makes them apostles.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not. So it makes me think, though, how we may have misunderstood Jesus's relationships with the disciples.
Tell me more.
Um, well, I wonder if I mean, they are random, but I wonder if there was something more that there's something connected them to each other. Um, I'm still not sure, but it just feels like they may have known him, or there was something peculiar or something about him that they connected with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. So yeah, they are random. They are just normal people.
Mm-hmm.
They're fishing, right? They're out doing their work. They're not lounging. They're doing their work. They're doing something. And he comes along, and for them to stop working and
Mm-hmm.
go with him, it feels like there's something about their relationship, or something that, like, they maybe have seen him before, or maybe not. Maybe he seems familiar. You ever like meet someone and you're like, you just seem familiar to me. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
There are people you just have like an automatic connection with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is random. It is. I'm not trying to make it seem like there had to be something extraordinary about it, but I
Maybe there
do
was. I mean, so that's the thing, is it's so
don't
vague.
know.
You don't really know.
Right, but I'm
I just
thinking,
think of like the implications of what it would have meant for them to just get up and leave right there. Like, are they, are they caretakers of any family? Are there people that are dependent on them being fishermen in their
right,
household that are now
exactly.
like gonna do what for money since they randomly got up and left?
I know.
Um,
I mean,
you hear it,
Zebedee,
right? So
he loses his
why wasn't
kids.
he invited? First of all,
I don't
I'm gonna
know.
take your sons. You're too old to be my disciple, though.
Yeah,
What? Or maybe he was like, sure, I guess you can go, guys, but like, I still have to take care of your mother and your sister and your little
right.
brother, and like,
Yeah.
so
Don't
someone's got
mind
to
me.
keep.
I'll stay out here in the
Yeah,
boat. Like,
I'll keep working. Um,
yeah, it's so random.
yeah.
Yeah, it is.
I like to compare, like sometimes I try to envision what a scenario like this would be in the modern day.
Hmm.
And I think in modern day times, if you were randomly just to quit your job and start following a religious guy around the country, we have different words for that. And your family would not be happy at all. They'd be like, wow, sorry, Joe went and joined a cult. That's what that would sound like. So
Yep.
it is really interesting. And like, what do you think, what more did he say? Or was it really just come and follow me? And they were like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, I think that's the beauty of scripture, of these stories, is that there are parts that are left out for us to imagine. And perhaps that's because then we get to understand our part in it as well, right? So like, why do we follow Jesus?
Yeah.
Why do we say we believe in this person and this God and this, like why are we doing that? And so I wonder if part of the story is also to connect those who hear it and they're trying to understand why they would just senselessly follow Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, true. I also just wonder if like maybe the author just didn't think that through, that like that wasn't, they like didn't assume anybody would question it. They'd be like, I'm trying to tell you that this is the Son of God, and these guys just stopped and they went.
And they went.
And we're not supposed to question that. We're just supposed to understand that that's what we're supposed to do. That's what I wonder sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, that's also possible. I'm not sure we're not supposed to question it, but maybe that's where I land. That's why I land with that part of the, yeah.
I'm with you. No, I'm with you. I think, yes, that we should continue to wrestle with scripture and question some of these things. I think that is how we grow in our own faith and understanding. I think sects of Christianity that are really against asking questions and accepting everything at face value, I think there's a lot more problem in that. And just because the world is more nuanced than that, right? Like,
right.
If you take everything at face value, nothing's going to add up.
No, that's very true. And also, I mean, it's just a part of the human experience to process things, to question, to think through why certain things are happening,
And that's, I think that's an evolved faith, right? That the fact that like, as you have your life experiences and need to process them in relation to the story of God's people, you have to ask questions, or else
for sure.
It's never gonna, you're always gonna be unsatisfied or disappointed.
Yeah. I mean, but I think that's part of the mystery, the part that we don't have to answer. But we can wonder, right? Like, what was it about Jesus in that moment that they would leave everything behind in that sense, right? To leave their livelihood because they were working. They weren't just like lounging. They were doing their jobs. So what does that look like, and why is that, right? So it's a worthy thing to maybe ponder and even discuss.
Yeah.
And consider for ourselves.
Because like, I mean, it's not just an impulsive decision, right? Like there's something else going on that is causing them internally to make this very conscious choice with their life.
Right.
And it's a big deal. Again, we're talking about leaving friends, family behind, all of those things.
Yeah.
And so here's another reason that I included the extra verses of 24 and 25 is because we also like to focus on the disciples as these 12 men that chose to follow Jesus, but to recognize here that there was a whole horde of people that started following him around the country. It wasn't just 12 guys.
Right.
And so that is just to sort of remember that, because people are like, oh, it's these 12 men. Well, sure. And all of these other people.
Right. Because they got to experience his presence and experience him. And so they followed. Yeah. But it does also say something about the difference between at least the four that are mentioned and that part, how there doesn't seem to be this like healing, this miraculous thing that happens before they start to follow him, right?
That's a good point.
And the crowd comes after they've experienced something. I do want to offer one of my favorite kind of commentaries and commentators, I guess, is the Reverend Debbie Thomas. I'm not sure she writes as much for the Journey with Jesus resources, but her commentary on this from 3 years ago is still quite beautiful. And she offers that like part of why they may have gone immediately is because Jesus, like, he says, hold on, I'm sorry, give me a second.
No, it's okay.
He says, I will make you. And she kind of plays on that part of what Jesus does in the process of like offering them something um, that that is like forming them. And
Yeah.
she said this one part, it says like, this is what she says, I will make you, he tells the fisherman, I will cultivate, deepen, magnify, purify, protect, and perfect the people God created you to be. And like, there's something about that like is really connecting with me on why they may have immediately left, where like there's this longing for us as human beings to want to belong and to be cultivated and to be cared for.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if those words resonated in a way for them that is the reason why they went so quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like giving a purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. And not just a purpose, but like meeting them, like I said earlier, meeting them where they are, a very authentic way of connecting with people. And I think that a lot of us want that, right? Like we want to be met, we want to be seen, we want to be formed, and to have that as a part of a calling, to be a part of something is appealing, right? Which is why people tend to follow cults. Right? Because there's something about it that kind of like meets people where they need to be seen, and who knows what was going through their lives at that moment, right?
I mean, like a lot's going on, right? As they their land continues to be occupied by various different, foreign nationals, right? And so like there's just so much going on, and I think they're looking for someone to come and bring the salvation from their oppressors, right? And this guy is in the most genuine and authentic way offering that.
Right. And I mean, going back to your cult point though, that's the scary part about it, but
I mean, it kind of was. I mean, but it worked out, I
guess. Yeah. I mean, and so it makes it very like, when you think about it, but also I think it can speak to our own personal needs and desires in our relationship with God, right?
Yeah.
Like, and maybe people need to hear that they're not alone and that struggle to be seen and a desire for God to see them and to know and to be known, right? So that's it's what's coming up for me right now when I'm thinking about it. But yeah.
Well, I mean, he was a very successful cult leader. And, again, though, all of these, the way that that cults become popular and is that they're offering something that is what people need to like their very bones, right? And so that is what it is here. But I want to talk a little bit more about sort of this quoting of Isaiah again here. So the author of Matthew really likes to quote Isaiah because one of his big main points is that they want to make sure that like what they're really exemplifying for the audience of this gospel is that this is the one that Isaiah prophesies.
Right.
To build on that. So specifically a Jewish audience who would have heard and be very, very familiar with Isaiah's prophecies to say, hey, all of this that Isaiah was saying was going to happen, look, this is the guy because it's happening. All the way down to like where he lived and started to do ministry. That was a very, very important point. And remembering that at the time that like Isaiah was written, they were under Assyrian occupation, and then it changed hands, and now it's under Roman occupation. But just that these people, those that lived in these small fishing communities, were just over and over again, just being colonized by others. And so, what does it mean that a local guy is coming with this kind of message?
Yeah.
And how important that would be, from what they heard, and why it is that like you can see then their scriptures of Isaiah being fulfilled through this guy, and why that was such an important message. I wonder what it would have been like if he would have tried to go to some different places first. Like we see in the other gospels, we hear when he was like 12 and they had to go back to Jerusalem, that they do that a lot, right? That they make that journey.
Yeah.
What if he had tried to start more in that area? Do you think he would have gotten the same momentum?
Probably not in the same way. I don't think. Yeah, I mean, I'm also remembering, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that at this time there were multiple people who proclaimed to be, the Messiah. And people would follow different people,
this
right?
was lots of cult leaders going on.
Right.
Some of which rallied around John, right? It's like John had his own set of disciples that they
right.
thought, that.
Right. Like, who is this guy, right?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think, well, like you said, I think Matthew is trying to make a point about Jesus fulfilling something from the prophet Isaiah. So
I also wonder if it comes down to like because of John. So the fact that this story really pivots that Jesus's ministry gets jump started by the fact that John was
when he's arrested. Yeah.
And so I actually wonder if it's just a really smart move, right? If you think about again what's going on in their political landscape.
Yes.
And the fact that John just got arrested, is he actually really out here sort of on the margins of society intentionally starting there for his own safety?
Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, I forgot that part. Yes. I truly believe that is a part of it. 100%. That he's like, oh, all right, well, I should go. I should not be over here. I
see what you're doing there.
I see what's happening here.
I'm gonna bounce before
I'm gonna go over here. Yeah, I mean, that's a telltale sign for people in general, right? Like, I think it's important for us to remember that he was a human being, right? And so, yes, of course, I think that was probably wise to move away from the danger. And also, him going to Galilee, it definitely takes him back, right? Because his dad is from Nazareth of Galilee, right? So he's also going to a familiar place.
Yes.
And so he's going to a place he's familiar with that he can escape from kind of like the limelight for a minute, and find his people in a more kind of underground way. Right.
Well, and that might feed into what you said about like when he came up to the disciples, is he a total stranger or not? And he might not have been, right? If he's really like used to being in this area. They may have crossed paths for sure as as fishermen who were probably contracted with the Romans as well to provide fish. For the cities. And additionally, Jesus working also as a carpenter would have been contracted into various Roman homes and organizations. So like there's a, sort of, you got your blue collar workers. There's probably
there's some connection there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that he is definitely getting away. They could have hung out
at the same bar when their shifts were over.
Right. There's a lot of There's a lot of points at which they may have met before, but yeah, I mean, he definitely is trying to, remove himself from the dangerous area in that moment. Um,
Well, it
and
also
then
so that thing about
let
danger,
me
right?
see.
So like as we
Hmm.
already know so far in his life, he has had to run from danger.
Hmm.
Right. So we hear that, he had to flee for danger
Right.
as a baby. That now, okay, John's arrested. We're off here kind of in the rural spaces, continuing to kind of stay out of the way of the danger that is coming.
Right.
That build up that we spoiler alert, we know how the story ends, right? That ultimately, what happens. And understanding that while there may be some atonement fulfillment in your personal Jesus atonement theory, there is also this aspect of the political environment danger that Jesus steps into that does aid and abet this his murder.
Yeah. I mean, he's born into it. I
Yeah.
mean, every part of his life is has that danger involved in it in Matthew's story, right? Like you said. So
Mhm.
yeah, it makes sense that he'd be like, yeah, let's go over here first.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then also a familiar place, right? So he didn't just go to like a random place; he went to a familiar place.
Do you know what I think also as like at least this is how it functions in the Lutheran church when you're
Yeah.
typically your first call, they don't send you to like a nice church in the middle of, a cool suburban area like some people. Um but you get put in
Uh-huh.
these dinky little churches, in maybe rural spaces or I served in, very small churches, even in urban spaces. But that you serve in these I don't know, so I'm thinking like Jesus is first call pastor, this
Where
is
he
where you
goes.
start. Uh-huh.
I think it's a little unfair to do that. but okay, so yes, and like I said, he was familiar. Like I don't think that he went to a place where he did not have the ability to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just want to say that I don't think that is necessarily in line.
No, I was just trying out
No,
there. There's no
I know
truth to
you
that
are.
statement
I
whatsoever.
know. I know. I'm actually backing you up on that. I think that that's ridiculous that happens. But like Jesus is going to a place that he knows, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for him to do ministry, even if they don't really know him, like if he's not like their friend, right? He's still familiar enough to know where to go,
Mm-hmm.
who he could probably even connect with, to know what maybe the people themselves would be familiar with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily about this him fleeing to this like this space that is so unfamiliar to him where he has to find his way, right? He goes to the place he knows. And so I think that's also important to remember when we're thinking about being sent out, being
Mm-hmm.
amongst people, is what is the familiarity about it for us and where are we connect? How do we connect with it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that's a key piece into and again to being sent out to do sort of ministry is having that familiarity piece. Is what am I trying to say here? I don't want to say more effective, but I think more genuine.
Yeah. It's authentic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I also like see work that we do in places that don't feel that way because okay, so for instance, I once upon a time went on a youth. I wasn't a youth. I was an adult chaperone, but
Mm-hmm.
helped lead this youth mission trip with a certain organization that I'm not going to name. But
Mm-hmm.
we went in. So we're talking like busloads and busloads and busloads of mostly white high schoolers
Mm-hmm.
from more affluent places because this was not a cheap trip to take, right? And went to an area that was predominantly poor. And
Mm-hmm.
we go in for 1 week and we fix things for them.
Mm-hmm.
We bring in lots of money, lots of tools, lots of things, and we physically fix things. And then at the end of the week, you invite them to this church service to hear about Jesus. Everything about it like just made my stomach turn, of like, this is not how Jesus went about doing ministry, nor is it the most, effective way. In contrast to when I was I served as a chaplain at the Johns Hopkins Center for Addiction and Pregnancy for a little time. And the main counselor that was there was a woman who was a former addict herself. And that she knows what each and every one of those steps that those people or those women are sitting in right now, and where they're at, and what parts of Baltimore that they came from, and knows them, and knows their people, and knows their places. And that woman was the single most effective tool that center had, and they knew it, right? Like, that was her gift, because she had the experience, because she knew where they were, what they were going through, and how they got there. And that is so much more of a genuine way of approaching ministry.
It truly is. And that makes me think also, maybe that's the reason why he chose Peter and Andrew and the other two, because they knew enough about the people to whom he was going to be ministering to.
Yeah.
Like, they were fishermen, so they they probably fed a lot of people. They probably had many connections with multiple people,
fish in local markets,
right,
around to different town to town.
Exactly.
Right, as fishermen, they would have gone from town to town,
right,
and being very familiar with the area and the people.
Exactly. So he chose people who could more authentically connect with the people he wanted to love and care and be around and heal and bring into the fold. And so I think what you're saying is very important for a lot of us Christians to understand. And that's that the number one, ministry doesn't happen in isolation. And two, it's very important that we are being our authentic selves, and that there are people who truly understand the context and the culture in where you are, right? And I think that is part of Jesus's ministry, and something we can definitely connect with, right? Yeah, and I'm finding it even here at First Lutheran. One of the things that I think has shifted here, and they're wanting to love and care for their neighbors, is that they focus their attention in the county in which the church, in Howard County, in which the church is actually a part of, right? And they took the time to learn about their neighbors who are not all like them and realize that there's a diverse population here. There are a multitude of different economic and social statuses here, and so where our energy is put in terms of loving and caring, it goes to with the organizations that are actually caring for people who need it in Howard County, right? And so it helps to broaden the perspective of not just our church, but people in general, as to like what is going on around them, right? And I think that's so important.
Well,
right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is what transforms a church from a social club into a missional community.
You got it. You got it, right?
And that's the thing that I think is the biggest struggle. One of the biggest struggles that especially, I can speak from a Lutheran perspective and mainline Protestant denominations that we are struggling with.
Absolutely.
Is how to make that transformation.
100%.
And what's around your church is your mission fields. I've heard some interesting decent arguments that like church buildings in and of themselves is what prevents us from being a missional church.
Yeah.
Your face just said like you have something to say about that.
Well, oh God. I just no, I can't go there fully, but like it's yeah. There's so much work. There's so much emphasis
Yeah.
on keeping our buildings upright.
Listen, do I know it? Understand
Yeah.
how much money that tiny old churches can take to maintain? That you're like,
Yeah.
wow, imagine what we could do with that.
Right.
Or the time and energy that gets spent on doing that could be put somewhere else. And another
Yeah.
thing I think in certain churches, and I've experienced this, not in every church that I've served at, some churches are, so I've served with some communities that are very, very good at this. Particularly my internship site in New Jersey was very good at this. But I've been a part of other communities that are wholeheartedly like so much engrossed and like they only ever spend time in their church building in that community that they're not even aware of what's happening across the street,
Yeah.
and what does that tell us about where our focus needs to shift?
Yeah. Majorly, especially in this time where we feel like the church has become less and less relevant.
Yeah. We should
So,
I wonder if someone's could start like a missional community where they are like mostly nomads, like every week they hold like a worship service somewhere else.
right. Within their community,
Yeah,
around
yeah.
them. Yeah,
Exactly.
no. Yeah.
You'd have to have
Or
some really good word of mouth so that everybody knew where you were meeting.
right.
Because I could see so many arguments. Well, if nobody knows where you're at, they're not going to be able to come to church. Well,
That's
it's more of
major.
a hide and seek kind of church, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to be paying attention.
I also want to honor though that I get why people really want to hold very like a tight grip on their places, right? Because it's such a sacred space. And
And a very useful
yeah,
ministry
it
tool.
is. It is. So
Very useful ministry tool when done.
I'm always
when
trying
done
to
right.
make sure we stay like keep the nuance in there. I'm not opposed to us really trying to keep our spaces
I also
upright.
I'm
I'm not saying you are either.
I'm not interested in being the pastor of a mobile church. That sounds
Same.
logistically a nightmare.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I'm not for it.
But I'm
Again,
for those other people doing it.
but it's a nuance of like this is an incredible gift and ministry tool that you have.
100%.
How are you using it?
Right. I agree.
That's the key piece.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think that's important when we're thinking about being followers of Jesus, being, I'm using these words intentionally because that's where we're at, right? So what does it look like for us to hold space, to use that space for a multitude of reasons and for ministry, and to see ourselves outside of it, to see ourselves among people and with people. And, I don't think Jesus was like, if I won't heal you if you don't come and follow me. Like he just went and did the things, and those who felt compelled to do so followed, and other people were like, well, that was really nice, and they stayed in their homes. And so and I think that that's the other part of it that maybe we could consider when we're thinking about ministry, that it's not always about the amount of people that we can get to come along, but it is about the beautiful work that happens when Jesus shows up. And so,
yeah, that's a key piece. And again, it's that shifting that missional focus, right? It's not about butts in the seats, though I do understand that can be an helpful piece to do ministry, as that typically relates to finances. Money that's necessary to do things. So there is that piece, but also it's about the work. I took a training through the ELCA a couple of years ago. Wasn't great, totally recommend it, but I did learn a couple of things. One of which that was framed really well for me was when you talk about being an invitational church. what are we inviting people into? Are you inviting people to just come sit quietly for an hour every Sunday and listen to someone else talk? Or are you inviting someone to join a protest? Are you inviting someone to come and show up with you and your pastor at an activism for, say, Black Lives Matter? What are you inviting people to do? Are you inviting someone to come and help serve food for those that do not have sustenance sustained? Like, what are you inviting people into? And that makes all the difference in the world as to how you are building church.
Very true. Yeah. I'm going to think about that a little longer. Because I also think there is something to the invitation for people to come and just be for even just for a little bit. And I don't mean like sit in a pew and be quiet, but I do mean there is something quite powerful and beautiful about collective worship. And when it's done in a matter of people coming to uplift one another and
that's even a different way. If you're inviting someone to be a part of a community authentically, like by inviting someone as who they are to be a part of something, I think that is still even different.
Agree with you. Yeah, I think all of that matters, right? Mm-hmm. And so this invitation from Jesus first to the fishermen, and then to the people who see him and connect with this thing he's doing, is one that, going back to what I was saying earlier, is one that really resonates with the people and who they are. And I think that is so important. In understanding not only our relationship to one another, but our relationship with God and what God sees and does with and for us.
And I think Jesus invites them into both, right? He invites them, again, going to the place where the people are known, and he's inviting them into community.
Right.
We talk about all of these people that are joining this community. It's not just 12 guys, right? Like
right.
Everyone that's now being a part of this.
Right.
And everyone that's now being a part of this is also invited to help Jesus do this ministry of doing the healing and doing the feeding, right? So it's both.
Yeah, it's not just an experience. It's also you become a part of it. Yeah, I agree. I love that. Mm-hmm.
And, as we, try to model church off of what Jesus does, it seems like a good place to start.
I mean, also good luck with that. I'm sorry. It's not easy.
I walked right into it. It's fine. It's perfect. All right. Well, Pastor Tamika, thank you so much for this great conversation. I look forward to hearing what your sermon's going to be like in a couple weeks. So
thank you. Good. Me too. Thank you so much for this opportunity to join you. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Everyone, thanks so much for those that have listened. We continue to appreciate your support. And please share this podcast with friends and family and those that you think could really just use a little bit of God talk and, journey with us as we discover and discern and explore our scriptures. You can learn more at 10footpolepodcast.com and find us on Facebook and Instagram at 10-Foot Pole Podcast. And of course, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. The 10-Foot Pole Podcast is a ministry of the Delaware Maryland Synod. To learn more, go to demdsynod.org. Take care, everyone.